Hey there everybody, it's been a while since I recorded a YouTube video. The last 3 months have been really busy for me, starting with the Disney Lorcana challenges. I was in both Atlanta and Chicago, and around that time also testing with my team and not wanting to leak our prep, so I didn't make a ton of content out of that. Then, shortly thereafter, I ended up getting promoted at work, so I haven't had a ton of time to play Lorcana. Um, but yeah, I've still been playing, and I'm not completely washed up. Although I did not make top cut either time. I did get to win Let It Goes in both Atlanta and Chicago. In Chicago, I had the record that a bunch of people qualified for top 64 with, but I bubbled out and unfortunately did not get to play day two. And then, of course, I didn't play a ton of set championships, but when I did, I know I managed to pick up one champion playmat and one Ursula promo. So I'm not, I'm not completely garbage at the game. I've been keeping up with things. So I decided I wanted to try doing some content again because I'm super excited about Shimmering Skies, as everyone is every time there's a new set. And I wanted to start off with something that would be really easy for me so that I could dip my toe into the water very, very gently. And so here we are doing a legendary tier list. I figured this is probably the bottom of the barrel level content to warm my content creation muscles up again. So anyway, I'm just going to hop right into it. Unfortunately, I do think that a lot of the cards in this set, this set of legendaries, are not super strong, unfortunately. I think that's kind of the nature of it. There's only 12 cards here, and then, as we get more and more sets, the bar for good card goes higher and higher and higher. It's just the way things go, is we have a new card game that gets additional cards added and no cards leaving the constructed pool. But we'll start with Camoo Madrigal first. Now, Camilo, he has an interesting effect. Being in Amethyst makes this probably as playable as it could be. Bouncing your own characters is, a decent effect. Obviously, if you're playing a mid-range deck in Amethyst, you're likely to have some number of Merlins that are worth bouncing. My biggest concern with him is that he doesn't get any value when he comes into play. He dies to Medusa. He's overall pretty slow. If you have a big lore threat to gain a bunch of lore with Camilo, I think that oftentimes you'd want to leave them in play, so it's pretty tempo negative to be bouncing the sorts of things that would give you a bunch of lore with Camilo, so I'm going to put him in C tier. I think that it's possible he'll see play. I don't know that it's particularly likely, but hey, maybe there'll be a really cool combo or, some really high lore threat that, gets banished at the end of the turn or something in the game in the future. For now, not my favorite card, but certainly very interesting. Next up, we have Robin Hood. Now, Robin Hood, it's 1/4 quest for 2 on Inkable, 4-drop in Ruby. When you quest with him, you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you may play an action from among them for free. Now, that's a really powerful effect, and it's also really, really strong in Ruby, because there just aren't a lot of effects like this in Ruby. Things that cheat on ink tend to go to other colors. So I think this is a really, very, very interesting card. It's tough to say how good it's going to be. Obviously, it dies to Brawl, dies to Medusa, dies to Sisu, Fox eats it. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you don't get the effect on play. That said, it's still quite a strong effect. I mean, it's definitely at least playable. And I'm between very strong and playable. As far as what you want to be playing with this, I mean, I'm not sure. There's so many actions. It's not like songs where, the best six and cheaper songs are like definitely in steel. I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it's got a lot of potential. The cards you don't pick get dumped into your bin, so there's some synergy there with things like Chernobog or whatever. But I do think that the character itself is very susceptible to being removed, so B tier it is, I think, for me, especially considering it was not inkable. If it was inkable, I might bump it up to A, but we'll see. It wouldn't surprise me if it ends up performing at A tier quality, but it also wouldn't surprise me if there just isn't a home for it right now. Next up, we have Blue Mufasa. Now, this is a card that I think is extremely, extremely strong. I'm just going to drop it here so that I don't have to drag it around for the next minute, but it has the perfect stats. And I think that Sapphire kind of only has one really, really good game ender right now on the top end in Tamatoa. And so this is another good game-ending bomb for Sapphire decks to play, which is really nice because if you don't have a ton of items, Tamatoa isn't amazing. Now, almost every Sapphire deck is going to be playing Popsicles and Flaversham, so you could jam Tamatoa into basically any Sapphire ramp deck at present, but if all you have are the Popsicles, maybe Tamatoa isn't the best, and something like Mufasa can fill that role really, really nicely. It's really, really good with Deine. The fact that when you play this, you pick up 2 cards and it's sort of like a pseudo draw effect can be nice. It lets you kind of fishbone your way up to 8 without worrying about having no cards in your hand when you get there, which is sometimes a problem when you have fishbone in play if you, say, don't have a whole new world or something like that. And the ability to effectively double the ink you have in play is also extremely, extremely strong. So if you have a fishbone in play, you play Mufasa, pick up 2 of your ink. Now you're down to 6 ink, but next turn you could fishbone up and ink up back to 8 again, and then Mufasa gives you effectively 16 ink the turn after you play it, which is just absurd. If you have a powerful draw engine of any sort, you're going to be sitting really, really pretty. Yeah, I think the power level is crazy. Not to mention, it dodges basically all of the removal that people are playing right now, which is, I think, perhaps the biggest point in its favor. It dodges Zeus Bolt, obviously all the other steel removal, dodges Medusa, dodges Sisu, dodges Brawl, also dodges World's Greatest Criminal Mind, so it's very, very difficult to remove, which is important because setting yourself back 2 ink might be a problem if you are unlikely to be able to keep this guy around, but I actually think it's quite likely, at least in the current meta, that he sticks around for a turn or 2. So yeah, I don't know if he's meta warping. The fact that he's uninkable makes me think that he's not going to be played as a 4 of in most decks. So I think I'm going to stick him in very strong for now. But yeah, again, it wouldn't surprise me if he was a little bit better than that. Next up, we have Claribel. Now, Claribel is an interesting card. 5/6, quest for 2 in Emerald. 7 cost, and it shifts for 5. And at the end of your turn, if your opponent has more cards in hand than you can drop to that same number of cards. Certainly as a 7-drop, this is pretty bad. The stats aren't horrible, but it doesn't get value the turn it comes into play, and you know, it's not the game-ending threat that a lot of ink colors have at 7. The effect is certainly very interesting. I think if you are playing an aggressive deck and you're able to shift this out and draw a couple cards with it, it actually ends up being pretty good. The trouble is there's not a ton of Claribels that you want to shift this onto. There's this sort of build your own Maleficent in Emerald, which is probably the best option. Similarly, your opponent needs to have more cards in hand than you, but obviously if you're playing this card, you're likely trying to have less cards in hand than your opponent, so that's maybe not too much of concern. That said, it does seem like a lot of setup, and I don't know, you know, the 3-drop Claribel isn't like a slam dunk in an aggro deck, right? It only quests for 1, so I'm thinking playable for now or C tier. I'm gonna put it in C tier, I think. Yeah, I think it's a little bit too slow, and there isn't a slam dunk Claribel to shift this onto right now. In the future, maybe it moves up, but then I'm not so sure. There are probably just easier ways to draw cards if that's what you want to do in your aggro deck. Next up, we have this Donald Duck. It shifts for 4. It's a 3/6, 4/5 in Ruby. Quest for 1. And so when you play this character, if you shift him in, your opponent loses 2 lore, which is a cool effect. There's not a ton of lore loss effects that are playable right now. And then, of course, if your opponent has 10 or more lore, it gets Challenger +6, I believe. Okay, no, it actually just gets Power +6, Strength +6. So, I don't know. I don't think it's very good. I'm gonna put it in C tier just because losing 2 lores is a strong ability, and you know, we haven't seen a ton of it, and I think aggro is going to be getting better this set, so maybe that makes him playable. There's not a ton of Donald Ducks that you really want to shift this onto currently, so I am not super optimistic. All right, this 7-drop Genie. So Genie is a 5/5 the quest for 2 in Amethyst, and when he is exerted, your opponent's characters do not unexert at the start of their turn. So I just don't think that's a good enough effect for 7. Now, if this character had shift, that'd be one thing. You could shift it onto a Genie and then get this effect kind of out of nowhere, surprising your opponent. They might have 3 characters exerted, they can't get them back. That could really do some damage because this could enter play exerted, basically. At present, I mean, it's just very face up. You have to play this for 7, which is a lot, and then you have to quest with it. But if your opponents need their characters to like challenge down this Genie, they can't just wait one turn so that they don't get locked down. And I think that counterplay is kind of the biggest problem for this Genie, obviously on top of being uninkable. I don't think this is good. I don't think you can really justify playing it. It's too slow, too inconsistent. It only quests for 2, right? It's not like it quests for 3 or 4, and you just are happy to get that out of him. You kind of need to be getting a lot out of the ability, and I think it's too slow for that. This Jafar, on the other hand, I'm actually a pretty big fan of. It's Challenger +7, so it's an 07 Challenger +7 quest for 2, or 6 in Steel. And then the real sauce here is the ability Intimidating Gaze, which opposing characters with cost 4 or less can't challenge, which I think is a very, very strong ability. Now, 6 is pretty expensive, but the card is inkable, which does go a long way, and having a full 7 willpower does help keep it alive, especially against Steel decks. So I think against like a Steel mid-range deck, like let's imagine an Amethyst Steel mid-range deck or something, I do think that this could be pretty lights out against them. I think it seems playable as like a tech card in those situations, and then, effectively challenging as a 7/7 is pretty nice as well. It is slow, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it can protect your locations too. It really does shut off the challenging ability of almost every card your opponent's going to have in play when you play this, so that it's a really tough ability to evaluate. I'm going to put it in playable. There's a chance it ends up being worse than I think and moving down to like C tier or something, but we'll stick it in playable for now. I just think that second ability is so strong that it has a good shot of seeing play. This Arthur, so 3/6, quest for 3, shifts for 5, I believe, 7 cost uninkable in Steel. And when it enters, you can give something Challenger +2 and Resist +2, and it can challenge ready characters this turn. It reminds me a lot of 7-drop Cinderella in Steel, except it compares pretty poorly in basically every way. So the one way it's better than Cinderella is that you can shift this into play, give another character Resist and Challenger, and then that character can challenge on behalf of Arthur, unlike Cinderella. So if you shifted Cinderella in play and you wanted to take out, a Cogsworth or something, you would have to send the Cinderella itself at the Cogsworth, whereas Arthur can quest while sending a Fox Mimit Cinderella, at the Cogsworth, which is nice, but you only get it once. Arthur doesn't have these abilities on his own, and he's uninkable, and perhaps the biggest death knell is that he is very, very few other Arthurs that you actually want to shift this onto. So I think that it's just not quite good enough. I'm going to put it in C tier just because obviously, doing a bad Cindy 7 impression is maybe not the worst in the world, but it doesn't do it for me. Now, Prince Naveen, I think, is perhaps one of the most hyped up cards in the set for sure. And I agree for the most part. I don't think it's the most broken legendary we've ever seen by any means, but it does some really nice things. So it's a 4-cost Singer 6, 3/3 in Amber, quest for 2. And when you play him, he can basically sing a song from your hand for free, which is awesome. I think in a Steel Song deck, one of the most frustrating things that can happen to you is that your opponent removes your Singer every single turn before you're actually able to sing a whole new world, and then you get stuck with a whole new world in your hand, and you have to ink all the way up to 5 and hard cast it, and by that time you're often, way behind, and you can't play any of the cards you get. So the one nice thing that Prince Naveen does, I think, for Steel Song decks is it does not give your opponent the opportunity to remove your Singer. It just sort of comes down, sings the song, no questions asked, You know, the only counterplay here is something like Bare Necessities or Ursula in Emerald. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be seeing play in Steel Song for sure, just as a way to get songs out of your hand when it's difficult to keep a singer on board against something like a Steel deck. Now, that said, obviously it's uninkable, so I don't know that you can necessarily just, like, stick 4 Prince Naveen's in your deck. You know, maybe 2 or 3 is good. But with that said, I'm going to put an S tier. I think, you know, he's, in my opinion, the best legendary in the set. And I'm happy to play him in Steel Song, I think. And, you know, he only gets better as we get more songs. So yeah, yeah, big fan of Prince Naveen. Merlin. Okay, so this is a Merlin. It's a 6-cost 3/7 in Sapphire the Quest for 2, shifts for 5, and when you shift Merlin, you can search your deck for any card and put it into your hand, which is a really strong ability. I don't know how to evaluate Merlin here. It's difficult. I just don't think he's as good as he looks on his face. So there aren't a ton of good Merlins to shift this onto, in part because you kind of want your other Merlins to stay in play. You know, if you're playing, say, Blurple, for instance, and you have a rabbit in play, you don't really want to be shifting this Merlin on your rabbit. You just want to be bouncing your rabbit and drawing cards that way, right? So, like, you can shift this Merlin onto your rabbit. You can get any card you want, but that rabbit was already going to get another card as it was, so, you know, the card you get needs to be significantly more powerful. And unfortunately in Lorcana, we don't have a ton of like Silver Bullet Tutor targets that sort of just like completely destroy whatever your opponent is doing. So I actually think that maybe the deck searching ability here is less good than it seems. And then on top of course, dying to Medusa and yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's definitely a playable card, but I don't think I'm going to put it in A tier. I think, to me, it's just playable. Maybe it gets better as we get more Merlins that we actually want to shift onto. But I think that's where he goes for me now. This Anna, another difficult card to evaluate. So it's a 2/3 for 3 uninkable in Emerald. Quest for 2. So it's like an uninkable Benja stats. Then when you play Anna, you can pay 2 extra ink to get 1 of 3 effects, which are your opponent discards a card, you can give one of your character's challenger, and you can banish chosen damaged character. So I think the best ability among those is obviously the ability to banish a damaged character. If you're getting that ability out of her, she ends up being pretty similar to a chair lady like Lady Tremaine, Madame Medusa. You know, a little bit of setup required, can't hit necessarily anything all the time, much like those characters. But, you know, I think when you look at it that way, I think this character is definitely playable. I do think it is harder to get damage on your opponent's characters than it is to, say, have your opponent have a character with 3 strength or less in play. Obviously, Lady Tremaine can hit any character, but the downside is, of course, that they can choose their worst one. But it does cost 1 less, which is kind of nice. And then it does have these other options. And of course, the secret hidden mode, which is just 2/3, quest for 2 for 3, which I do think you'll end up picking or using some number with some frequency when you play this card. I don't know. It's definitely playable. I don't think it's like a very strong. I think it's probably B, solid playable. You'll see this in like, you know, 1 or 2 of in like green steel decks and maybe not a lot elsewhere, but I think when it's good, it'll be very good. And then lastly, this Mirabel Madrigal. So Mirabel, the art is lovely. Unfortunately, the card is not. It is a 5/5 for 5 in Amber that quests for 5. And you can only play Mirabel if you have 5 or more characters in play. Unfortunately, that will not happen very often. And when it does, you will likely have already won the game. So I think, you know, I can pretty easily slap this one into bad tier and call it a day. I wish this was good, but yeah, I mean, if you have 5 characters in play and you're playing this, you could probably just quest with all of your 5 characters in play and win the game that way. It just doesn't seem likely to me that you're going to lose the game unless your opponent plays a board wipe, at which point Mirabel also will be banished. So I just don't see the value there. Yeah, I mean, that's my tier list. one S tier card, one A tier card, a few B tier cards, some C tier cards. Yeah, I just don't really these 6. I think they're pretty unlikely to see play. These 2, I can't imagine it happening at all. I suspect these will see play. People will at least be trying them. You know, and they've got potential. These are the 2 legendaries I think in the set that are like slam dunks. People will play them. You'll be seeing them for the next few months. Yeah, I don't know. I wish the set was better. It reminds me a lot of set 2 where we didn't have a ton of super strong legendaries. Basically just the 2 in that set as well. But hey, maybe I'll be wrong. Let me know down in the comments what you agree with, what you disagree with, and yeah, I'll catch you next time.